Namaste, Dr. Claudia Welch. It's a pleasure to have you with us at Indic Academy. And
Namaste, Aparnaji. Pleasure to be here.
thank you. Just to tell our audience a little about you, you're an Ayurveda practitioner, as well as an Eastern medicine educationist, as well as you practice Oriental medicine. Um, we would like to know more about your journey, how it started, and what made you turn to the East.
Well, it's a long story. It probably started when my mother was pregnant with me, because right around then, my mother has passed, so I can't confirm this, but around the time she got pregnant with me, she met and she got initiated by her guru, who was from India. And then when I was 3 years old, so she became vegetarian and started on this spiritual path. And then when I was 3, her guru came to Boston, Massachusetts, where I lived. And she brought me to see him. And he was in this big hall, and I didn't sit on his lap. I didn't have a conversation with him. I just had darshan. And I don't remember anything else about being 3, but he was a mountain of a man. It was very impactful. And so then, and I guess we create stories that make sense out of things. So part of what I'm going to say is just a story of the sense that I've made out of it. But in the next few years, I had a couple of occasions where I just desperately wanted to know God, to be with God. And I was a kid. I didn't have the words for that. But I remember one day breaking into tears at the dinner table and saying, what's heaven like? Because those were the only words I could use. And I don't remember what my parents answered, but the story part of that's all happened. The story part is, I believe that seeing him awakened or touched that part of me that really started to vibrate quite a bit in my childhood. And then he passed away 2 years later, when I was 5. And then when I was 8, his successor came to the US, to New Hampshire. And my family had moved there because there was an ashram there. And so I remember, so he came, I was 8 years old. And actually, before I met him, a friend of mine some friends were going over to see him. He was a farmer in Rajasthan. And so some friends were going to see him, and I gave them a letter to bring to him. This was before I'd met him, but I had this very keen longing to know God. And so I wrote him a letter, and it was clearly an eight-year-old scrawl, or 7. I was 7 or 8 when I sent that. And he sent back a letter with them in January 1977. I still have this letter. And this letter was to a soul, not to an 8-year-old. It was to a person. And it said things in that letter that made my life. And so I loved him before I met him, because of this letter and my darshan from his guru. And so then he came in May of 1977, and I was in this little, well, not very little, but pretty small compared to, I don't know, this room, this medium-sized room. And there was a dais in the front, and I expected him to come through the doors in the front. And so I'm just on the edge of my chair, literally on the aisle, and I'm waiting to see him. I mean, I'm 55 now, and this was when I was 8, and I remember it like it was yesterday. So I waiting for him, and he comes from behind me, and I turn around and like look at him, and that that was it. That was it, Parnaji. I was in love. And so then, so that's continued to this day. That he passed away in 1997, but he's which is hard. When I grew up with that, I took it for granted. I didn't know that I was doing that, but I took it for granted. I had incredible teachers around me, most especially my guru and his guru. But when he passed away, I was kind of blown away that how much I took for granted. So that's been a difficult and ongoing part of my life, but also an incredibly blessed and grace-filled part of my life, because he gave me more than I can do in this lifetime, or so far. So he gave me a lot to work with, and I'm not a great practitioner. So I have a long way to go with that. So that keeps going, and that keeps me connected to him. And he lived in India. So I saved up when I was a teenager, and I went to see him when I was had just turned 18. Do you want to get a word in edgewise here?
No, I'm just happy listening to you.
Okay. All right. So I saved up, and I went to India for a couple weeks, and went to his ashram, which involved flying to Delhi and taking a train to. Oh, and actually, I think we took a bus that time. Sometimes we would take a train to Ganganagar and then a taxi for a couple hours, and then we'd get there. But I think we took a bus. Anyway, when I landed in Indira Gandhi Airport and stepped out, in those days, you didn't step into that tunnel. You stepped out onto the stairs and onto the tarmac. And I just, remember it so clearly, just looking up in the night sky, because it was one of those get there at 3 a.m. flights or something. And the moon was hanging like a bowl in the sky. It wasn't quite half full, and it was just like a bowl in the sky. And the scent of India, I just was like, oh, I'm home. And so then I did the meditation retreat with him, which, that was something, because I sort of expected to go be in bliss at the feet of my guru. And it was hard because my intellect had kicked in. I started out of love, and then the intellect came in with all these questions. How does this work? And what about these sticky points and so forth? And so that was a crucial time for me to address those. So then, so that's one strand. The second strand is that I've always been interested from when I was a child, very young, in medicine. I used to be very interested in the plants around me and what they were used for around here. And then I went to high school, and I kind of got derailed from learning about my local plants. But I was interested in medicine, and long story short, the interest in medicine plus the interest in India connected me to Ayurveda. So then Ayurveda became a very big part of my life and work. And I no longer am in practice. I was in practice for 10 years, did that in Chinese medicine together. And, there's been a lot of twists and turns along the way, but my guru and Ayurveda, and also those are two main strands. But I will say, let me give you another chance to jump in here if you have anything, but there's something else where the place I can go here that I think is relevant. Anything from you?
Please go on.
Okay. All right. So this is something that, I'm not sure who's ever going to listen to this interview, but this is something that I didn't realize when it was going on, but looking back, this feels very clear to me, is there were some decisions I made that didn't make any sense at the time, but looking back, they made a lot of sense, and they've become an important part of my life. So I went back to India like a couple of years later. I was 19. I turned 20. I was there for a year. I was in Benares. And I went on this program through the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it was a year-long program, and you're supposed to choose one like tutorial, which I chose tabla, and take Hindi lessons, which I did with the amazing Virendra Singh, who is still alive to this day and still in Benares. And you were supposed to write a 100-page original research paper on some topic. And I assumed it would be Ayurveda. That was what I went planning to do. But I got to Benares, and even having grown up on the spiritual path, which had a huge impact on me and was a big part of my life. And I grew up with the Bhagavad Gita in my house and the Adi Granth, and that, like, there was all kinds of, that was what was around me. Even so, I didn't know what was going on in my neighborhood in Benares, like all the festivals and the noise and the pujas and the everything going on. It was, I had no idea what was going on. And I couldn't bring myself to choose Ayurveda as the main topic. And I didn't know why, but it just felt like somehow not quite right to dive into that without understanding something of its birthplace, something more, what's going on. This is where it came from, and I don't understand where it came from. How can I understand the thing that came from all this if I don't understand even a little bit about all this? So I ended up choosing as my topic Benares Hindu Winter Festivals, which is a 3-month period, which sounds like not very much. But when you consider that there's more festivals than there are days in the year, really, if you really look into it, if you're an extremely devout Brahmin who's observing everything going on, there's all these things to mark. So when you think about that, then 3 months is plenty. And I didn't do all of the ones. I just did kind of the main ones that were going on. And when I picked this, I went to my advisors on the program and shared gleefully what I decided my project would be. And it was met with pin drop silence. You could hear a pin drop. And one of them finally said, I think I speak for both of us when we say, we wish you were taking this seriously. And I just burst into tears. I couldn't be taking it more seriously. But thankfully, I didn't listen to them. This is part of a good thing about having strong Mangal in your chart, strong Mars in your chart, is can get you in trouble, but it also can help have the courage to do something that doesn't seem like a good idea when I knew in my heart it was. So, and then they did a very good thing for me. They introduced me to Om Prakash Sharmaji of Benares, who passed away some 7 or so years ago, who became a tremendously important advisor and a dear friend in my life. And it was through studying the festivals that I learned about tithis, I learned about nakshatras, because all these festivals are fixed according to tithis and nakshatras, these time cycles present in India. And in the in certain, there's certain things that you're supposed to follow in certain festivals that end up coinciding with Ayurveda teachings about what to do at certain times of year for your health. And so I started not knowingly learning things that were common threads between Ayurveda and Jyotish and festivals and culture and understanding and all of this kind of thing. Didn't have anything obviously to do with Ayurveda, but it did help me understand how little I was in the sea of the context in which Ayurveda exists and the context in which Jyotish exists. And I went on to study with Hart Defoe, who was incredible Jyotishi, and then realized at that point how much studying the festivals and the tithis and the nakshatras, of course, how all of that affected Jyotisha. And in Jyotisha, you know, learning about the qualities of guru, which means heavy in, you know, in the gunas of Ayurveda, and it means Jupiter in the planets of Jyotish, and of course, you know, learning a little bit more about the tithis and the nakshatras and their role in Jyotisha. So what's important about this, I think, is when I look back on all of that, it was understanding even a little bit about the context in which Ayurveda existed enriched so much my understanding of Ayurveda, of how deep it was, how wide its spread was, how it touches everything because it's touched by everything. This has become, you know, this has become a big reason, I think, why satsangam.net, which is what I'm involved in now, came into being, is understanding the value of a contextual way of learning, which is not a traditional Western way of learning something. It's a traditional Eastern way of learning something. And I think that it's a bit troublesome to embark on a study of an Eastern subject in a very Western way, and we don't even know we're doing it. So that's had a tremendous impact. And of course, with my guru and, you know, learning a little bit about all these other things, it's where spirituality ends and profession begins. Is there's not a line there. It's intertwined, and it's all related to India. I don't live there. It's a hard place for me to live. I'm not good with heat, but I continue to go back regularly. And when I'm there, it's a little hard on my body. But when I come back to the US, it's a little hard on my soul. So I not exactly a resident of either place, and yet feel like a resident of both.
In this context, you in the talk that I had listened about the women and hormones, Claudia, the Indian context has, especially in the urban areas, has become very westernized. So
Yeah.
in that video, you talk about women wanting to be Jane Fondas, and this is practically the case everywhere. You know, the kind of body structure, the kind of activities, the kind of ambition that even women in India aspire to is uh, totally accepted from a Western perspective, and we've accepted it as our own. So when you talk about giving Ayurveda its Eastern context, is there any such thing left at all?
I don't quite understand the question. Is there anything
Is
left?
like, for instance, when you talk about hormones and you talk about stress,
Right.
all that is a very modern uh, phenomenon. at least probably in the last, you talk about the hormones itself being discovered only in the early 1900s.
Right.
So how does Ayurveda put all this, take all this and move into the 21st century? How
Right.
do we, bring Ayurveda into this world and make it relevant, so that
Well,
people
Ayurveda is
don't
in
have the
this.
time, they don't have time for anything.
Ayurveda is in this world. Ayurveda is going to be there whether we pay attention or not. It's already in this world. We don't have to bring it in. But what it shows us is, it shows us balance. It's an overused word, so practically means nothing. So let's have it be meaningful, at least in this conversation, like in a practical way. What does it mean? I think that in the same way that it's important to see the context in order to understand Ayurveda, and to see the context of a woman's life in order to understand what her hormones are doing internally, it's important to, if we zoom back and we say, okay, look, in terms of Western culture's effect and what can Ayurveda do with this, I think we absolutely need to, how to put this, we need to be committed. I'm going to use a word that I'm going to clean up here in a minute. It's not quite the right word, but it'll get us into the spirit of it. We need to be committed to anti-colonialism. And I know that the word colonialism is being used very widely these days, but I'm not sure that we really understand the toll, what that is, and the toll that it's taken on us as a global community, on us as women, on us as human beings, on us as participants on this planet and influencers on this planet, as we influence what's going on this planet. And so let's look at this for a minute. In the West, we talk about something called a good work ethic. We say somebody who's working very hard has a good work ethic. And a friend of mine, for example, came back from a non-Western country some years back and complained that, oh, they have a terrible work ethic there. Very broad statement, right? Terrible work ethic, so lazy. And that didn't sit well with me. But years later, I was listening to 1619, this podcast, about the role of slavery in the US and its impact on the formation of the US. Now, colonialism didn't start with the US problems, but this is a good microcosm to look at to understand what that's about. So in the system of slavery, how it worked was there was an overseer who would oversee the enslaved people. And say they were picking cotton, they had to meet a quota every day. If they didn't meet the quota, they were punished. If they overshot the quota, that created problems for everybody else, all the other enslaved people forever, because then you had to meet that new quota. And if you weren't, you were punished. So there was always this tension. I have to meet the quota, but not go over it. There's all this tension. Okay, then slavery was abolished, but that technique that the overseers used was imported into the new way of doing things, which was really the same way of doing things, but just giving tiny wages to the now enslaved people who aren't called enslaved people, they're called employees. And if they didn't meet their, and that got imported into the Industrial Revolution and complex and so forth. So that's where you've got these assembly lines and people have to meet quotas and so forth. And a good work ethic is you meet your quota and you do that without complaining. This is what we mean by good work ethic. This is really problematic. I know, another overused word, problematic, but it's insane. It's insane. And it's all about never having enough. The overseer doesn't have enough. His master doesn't have enough. We don't get enough. We try to make more. We're importing this into our lives, this never enoughness. And so what can Ayurveda bring to this? Ayurveda is here. It has everything we need. Let's use the medicine of subtraction and say, what can we subtract from this equation to allow the wisdom of Ayurveda to be manifest? And I think one of the first things we can subtract is this colonial idea of never enoughness, of what a good work ethic is. How could that be different? How could our lives be less transactional and more present with the moment of what the moment is called for? I think so. There's many answers to your question. What can Ayurveda bring to this problem? But let's look at the medicine of subtraction here and say, what can we subtract from this global picture to allow Ayurveda to flourish, and to allow Ayurveda to allow us to be able to live the wisdom of Ayurveda?
So what is it that you think Ayurveda does, Claudia? I mean, like you mentioned in that interview, you say for everything there's a pill today. Even if you don't have sleep, there's medicine. If there's hormonal disturbance, there's medicine. There's medicine for everything practically. So how does Ayurveda help to break that kind of reliance on medicine?
Yeah. Well, there's many ways that we can look at this, right? There's many different, we can look at it from Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. We could say you balance the doshas, and that will reduce your reliance on medicine. You could say, look at the Santarpana influences in your life, your Brahmana influences, those building, grounding influences. Are those enough? Are they too little? Versus the Langana, Apatarpana, also Yang in Chinese medicine. Look at those influences. Are those too much in your life? So we can look at those things to see how we can regain balance. But there are many different ways of looking at it. So here's just one possible way of looking at it is, again, let's look at the medicine of subtraction. I'm just going to come back to this because we treat usually in Ayurveda with this principle of opposites, that you treat with the opposite quality. So if I have too much heat in my body, to simplify this, right? If I have too much heat, introduce coolness to cool down that heat. If I've got too much oily, introduce dry to dry me out. If I'm too heavy, introduce light to lighten me, and vice versa, right? So from this point of view, if global life, if my physical, emotional, mental, spiritual part of my life is complicated, simplify it. So Ayurveda, one of the main ways it works is through medicine of opposites, treating through opposites. So if things are too complex, simplify them. Well, how do you simplify things? Medicine of subtraction. What are the things in my life that are unnecessary? And what I mean by that, or I think what is meant by that, is what doesn't align with my innermost essence, with the highest values, which can be found there. So it simplifies our needs. Can we make do with smaller, less, and have more time to simplify things so that all these ripples of complexity can quiet down. And when they quiet down, that changes our chemistry, our internal chemistry. Every thought creates chemistry. Thought creates chemistry, creates biology, right? So all these complicated thoughts, when they quiet down, things quiet down, and there is a shot at hormonal balance, for example.
And you've written a book on what doctors need, Claudia ji. So, I mean, we are now treating the doctors. So,
Yeah.
why do you think that is absolutely necessary?
That treating the doctors is necessary.
Yeah, you talk about four qualities that doctors should have or
Right.
should follow. So, why are they now our focus?
Why are those qualities our focus, or why is the
Why are
health of
health of doctors?
yeah.
We would
Well,
think that Vaidyas, I mean, maybe doctors are not equivalent to Vaidyas, but they are in the same mission of healing. So I
yeah,
would think they would prioritize certain values. Mhm.
right. So so just to be clear, these are not four qualities that I'm talking about. These are four qualities of effective physicians that are talked about from ages past, from Brihatrayi, from the greats of Ayurveda. And when so the name of the book is called The Four Qualities of Effective Physicians. At least that's the name in the paperback book. Complicated story. No, but but why is that important? When I wrote that book, really had a big impact on me, and it still does. And when I think about it, it really isn't just for physicians, it's for all humans, because all humans to some degree or another are a physician, in the sense, or have the potential to be a physician, in the sense that each one of us, when we have an interaction with another human, another animal, a plant, anything, we either leave that thing better, the same, or worse than when we found it, right? So if I have an interaction with someone and they leave feeling better, then forget herbs and remedies. The presence of the presence of the person has become medicine itself. Or if that person leaves the other person worse off, that person has become poisonous, right? Or neutral. And so everybody's, it seems, we all have the potential to leave what we find in a better way, shape, or form than when we find it. So we all have that potential to be a physician, even to a very small degree, and we become medicine. And I think it's important because if we look around these days, we all really need some good medicine. We're in need of it.
So, where you say you've stopped practicing, Claudia.
Yeah.
Why did you take that step? And was it to focus on spreading the knowledge of the context and to work on spreading information about Ayurveda?
Well, in the same way that I couldn't see when I chose to study Benares Hindu winter festivals, I didn't have any idea that that would be a good idea, but it has been, and I can see more clearly why from this vantage point decades later. I think, I think that refocusing on contextual learning has been an important part of that, but it's not the reason that I stopped in consciously. The reason that I stopped more consciously was, first of all, I mean, I think any action that I'm taking in my life if I'm aware, I'm checking in with my innermost essence and saying, what's right right now? What's right right now? What's right right now? What's right now? And that innermost essence gives that guidance. And at that point, it was right to stop. And what was happening was I had written the book Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life, and had been in practice for a long time with women and see what overwork and overstress does to hormonal balance and to women's lives. And I knew that intellectually, and I had a full-time practice. It was busy, and I was writing, I was now teaching, I was now traveling to teach about it, and it was too much, writing, teaching, and doing practice. And so something had to go. And that kind of innermost essence kind of sorted through things, and it was just clear I couldn't stop the momentum towards the teaching and the writing. And so I had to put that down. Otherwise I would be a complete hypocrite. It was too much. I couldn't do it all at the same time. So I used to talk about this all the time, and it's been a while, so now I can't remember, but I think it was the month that I turned 35. Was it the month I turned 35? 40? Can't remember. I gave away, at a certain point, it became clear, and I gave away my practice in exchange for being able to just practice a couple days a week. And then after a while of that, even that was too much. And so I would do some phone consultations. And then after a while, that was too much because I can't be available for follow-up consultations. And that's so important. You know, people say, oh, I just have a quick question. You know, how do I balance my hormones? Or I have a quick question. What do I do about my fibromyalgia? They're quick questions. They're not quick answers, right? That's a relationship. And having a personal care practitioner is so important for that follow-up, because you start going down a path, you have to refine it, don't give up, you know, have somebody that you trust and that you have that relationship with, and they know you now, and you have that, they have notes so that if they've forgotten what you said last time, they can look, and you have that. There's nothing that can take that place. I don't have that time. So
Yeah. And how long have you been visiting Vaidyakrama, and what does it mean to you?
oh yeah, great. From the beginning. So I met Dr. Ram Kumarji in, I think it was 2008, and it's now 2024. So it's a long time ago. And that was before Vajragrama was started. And you know how so many relationships you start by where are you from and how many siblings do you have and so forth, and you get to know the context. Well, this was a case with Ram Kumarji that, talk about context. We didn't talk about context at all. It was just immediately like what needs to be done and roll up your sleeves kind of energy. And maybe that was because there felt like a shared context. There felt like a shared value system context that just it just resonated so much that it didn't need to be talked about. So then the first time I went there was maybe 2010, 10 years ago, something like that. It was early on when there was just one block, and they feel like family. It feels like when we do things together. Satsangam works together with Vajragrama on different things. We did a healing sounds retreat in December, which was wonderful. And I mean, it's just such a special relationship to find that kind of familial resonance. And families can be pretty dysfunctional, but this one isn't. It isn't. So far, knock on wood, as we say here. It isn't. It's been really wonderful. So it feels like family, and I so appreciate the service orientation and the we orientation. And so that continues to be really valuable part of my life.
Mm. And if one last question, if you were to give a message to people about taking care and getting their health in their hands immediately for 2024, what would be your one main advice?
Well, there's all kinds of pieces of advice that land right at the right time for people. But since this has sort of become a theme of this conversation, let's go back to this, the medicine of subtraction. Is there something in life that is not serving us? Okay, maybe you can't get rid of everything, but is there one thing you can get rid of that feels like an obligation, that's not feeding me, that's not, I don't want to tell anybody what to do, but if we have these things that aren't feeding us, pick one of them and get rid of it, kick it out of the boat. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. I think we think if we get rid of something, everything will fall apart. But that's not been my experience. It's my experience that it gives room for grace and breath and time and space and reflection, and that things get better.
Thank you, Claudia. I mean, it's interesting because most people will add something rather than subtracting. They'll say, start going to the gym, or, change your diet, or they tell us to do more. And you're telling us to do less and do it correctly. So thank you so much. I really love this conversation and hope to interact with you further.
Me too, Aparnaji, and thanks anybody who's been listening. Can we just take a second, 5 seconds or 10 seconds together with everybody?